Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my opening, unboxing and review for both of the Aang figures in the McFarlane 5-inch toy line. So we have both the sort of standard Aang that is in the exact same wave as the Sokka, Katara and Zuko. But then we also have the combo pack Aang with Glider. So I just thought it was probably the best option to actually just do the direct sort of comparison. The two figures are likely going to be exactly the same. So we'll have the full discussion on everything Aang here. And then in the next video, to sort of finish off wave one of the 5-inch figures, we will do both Zuko and Sokka together as sort of the finish of our kind of first look at the 5-inch stuff. Obviously, last week I reviewed the Katara figure and the Appa figure as well, so that will complete everything. And then we're just looking forward to, I suppose, to get our first look at the 7-inch figures, which aren't too far off, so that's good. So I'm going to start off with the basic Aang. I think that makes sense. Because I'm guessing in terms of how they planned this, Aang was always planned to be one of the just standard figures, and then they also decided to do this. So this is sort of the extra thing that they did. So we'll start with this and see how different it is. Was it justified to do a whole other figure for Aang as well? So yeah, there's not too much to say here. The description here, it's the same as a lot of the other ones where it's like, yeah, it's pretty accurate. Some of it feels a little bit like it's still based off sort of like very early scripts rather than the description that you'd say for Aang like this many years on. But for the most part, it's fine. A nice clean image of Aang on the back, and as usual, Avatar Legends style packaging. And I like that there's not a lot of excess stuff going on here. Literally, you just pull the tray out and you have everything in the packet straight away. So in this case, same with Katara, all you get is the figure and one accessory. So with Aang, the one accessory you get is his glider staff in staff form, of course. So here is our first look, and obviously it is book 1/2 Aang. It's the outfit that he wears for the majority of the series, and obviously, at least for me, I've always preferred his book 3 design, so I definitely would be more eager and interested to see when they get around at this scale to doing that version of the figure. But you can see here, I think in hand, it's actually, you know, a pretty nice attempt at what I've always described before as a rather complicated design. That I think they even discussed this in some of the documentaries about Avatar, where like the complicated nature of Aang's clothing made the animation almost more complicated than it needed to be, and so the later designs are kind of actually probably easier to do. Just stuff like, you know, the inside of his leg having the kind of brown bit and then the yellow bit kind of goes over it. Like, if they tried to do this overly accurately, it does sort of, you know, get in the way. Let's take a look at the head sculpt here. I think in person, it's actually, I think, one of the nicer Aang figure head sculpts that we've had, in that it's still a big grin, but it's probably just the right size to be that, you know, fun-loving Aang from very early on in the series. I still overall wish that they'd tone it down just a little, and there was a little bit more of a neutral Aang. We'll get into why they did what they did with this one in a second. Obviously, articulation is the same as the Katara, where, you know, you've got everything you want in the shoulders. Pretty much, you've got the 90-degree bend on the elbow and the elbow swivel. You do have the waist swivel. The head is on a kind of ball joint, of course, so you can swivel it around and do a little bit of a head wobble up and down type motion. The Aang is actually, I think, the only figure in the entire opening wave, where there's nothing restricting sort of just, I suppose, seeing the hip articulation. So you can get a sense for like how usable it actually is, and also sort of how it works. So you can see it is actually a ball joint there. So that's how they get that pretty strong motion out of it. And then, yeah, you do have a kind of a knee swivel here. And again, it can actually do forward, you know, kind of broken leg type thing, but you know, you can go back more or less 90 degrees. So it gives you a sense for like, you know, the leg articulation is actually quite decent, but like with the Katara, I think it's really held back just by the fact that, you know, effectively, you did wonders, like amazing stuff with the hips, nice knees, and you sort of just squander a lot of that by just doing nothing with the ankles, like giving absolutely nothing to work with the ankles. They try their best to make it like somewhat of a better platform in that the bottom of the feet, it was the same on the Katara, they're not sculpted like completely flat, so that like there's still a sense where when like the foot is on the ground like that there's still like a little bit of a curve, so it's got a little bit more of a kind of stable platform, but it's not ideal, of course. But again, $10 a figure, very cheap, much cheaper than everything else. You get what you pay for to a degree. I didn't do this with the Katara figure, but because it's Aang, this is the only Aang figure I have from the original toy line back in like 2005, 2006. So you can see the scale is slightly bigger. It's only like a little bit bigger. Obviously, this is a weird kind of redo of Aang in Water Tribe clothing, which never actually happened in the show. But it gives you a sense for like, it's the same general scale, the same general articulation actually, because again, it's basically the same elbows, the same type of motion, shoulders, and the same type of stuff going on in the elbows. Again, hands molded in a holding position, just like this Aang. No wrists. One difference is that the head here can only move side to side, so it's only a head swivel, and it's on the neck here, whereas this is got a ball joint, so the head stuff is better here. You do have a waist swivel. They obviously do the hip articulation slightly differently, but again, it accomplishes the same. You do have the 90-degree knee bend, but even on a figure back here, they had ankles. Now, there's not much movement in these ankles, as you can see. Not much at all. But that's just enough to help out. And so, you can definitely make the argument here that, you know, I would trade the slight head wobble up and down for ankles, no problem. That there's definitely a sense for like, you know, realistically same price point, and so on. If I remember correctly, I think this comes with actually more accessories than this does, and it actually is more articulated. And the gulf between them is over 15 years. You know, the sculpting obviously is better. The thing that clearly is vastly better is the head. It just looks so much cleaner. The way they do the painting on the eyes, the eyebrows, the way they do the arrow and stuff like that, the mouth, the head sculpt is so much better. And that's where you can see that that's just a clear toy technology. But how is it so difficult to just put a simple ankle into it? I don't get it. It's what I think it's the one thing that really holds back this line and means that it goes from, I think, being a proper like, yes, you could be very happy as an Avatar toy collector just getting this smaller scale line. But the lack of ankles means that a lot of the time, all you can kind of do is just sort of stand the character there. And you can't do much more else with it. But that's that. The other thing with this Aang that I suppose we need to talk about here, and I'll actually bring in the Diamond Select Book 1 Aang here to talk about this. So, this obviously is much more articulated. It's a slightly bigger scale, of course. Now, head sculpt, horrifying on this Aang, ultimately. One of the weaker head sculpts we've ever seen, obviously. But you could see again some of the complexities of how you actually go about doing Aang's outfit. This orange shawl here that he wears, that's a key part of his outfit. How do you can even see it actually in the packaging there, you know, the movement that it has when you can do animation with it. How do you make that work? To do this Aang where he can go on his glider, they molded this in this position so that his hands can actually like basically point above his head and it won't restrict this pose. You saw, I think, with the best action Aang, which I don't have, they molded it normally in flexible material. This is more or less, like, it is flexible, but it's not really usable flexible, that sort of thing. It's a tricky thing to do right. On this smaller, cheaper figure, they of course decided to just mold that shawl sort of into his torso and into his arms so that the articulation isn't restricted at all, but they're not trying to go for the accuracy of that bit of the outfit, just the general sort of color scheme there. I think that's an interesting decision. It's probably for the best because I obviously talked in the Katara review about how I was wondering the whole time, the biggest question I had, how flexible is this material? The answer, not as much as it needs to be. It's too thick, and the idea of like, you can't really move the leg up without this immediately, the articulation kind of going down just on the basis of how kind of thick and not flexible this is. And the idea is that if they tried to do more along the lines of this figure and this style on Aang's shawl here, it would have hindered a figure that already doesn't have like a ton of articulation. So I think they made the best choice with this Aang to do it in that way, ultimately. So there's that. Now, moment of truth here, I guess. Can he hold the glider staff? And what's the correct way to do this? I guess the hands are sort of flexible. Okay, yeah, so that's fine. You can put it into his hand. And, okay, kind of fell out there. This is the thing with the Katara figure. Again, I pointed out that I thought the accessory was borderline unusable with the figure. I just didn't feel it worked like at all. I'm not really having much luck here either. I guess once it's in both hands, this is again lack of wrists on a figure that's using a two-handed weapon like martial arts. You have to use the elbow rotation here to in any way line up these hands. But I think this is going to be a little bit bendy. Yeah, this is not great at all in terms of the correct way to make this work. Okay, there we go, finally. Okay, so yeah, that should hold there. But again, you can see the problem in terms of, again, like, it's in his hands now and it looks decently nice there, but look at the kind of positioning of the joint here, that because of the lack of a wrist, you have to have the elbow pointed like all the way like here. So in terms of movement beyond this, like, there's not a lot more you can really do. So again, you can sort of see that it's a bit hindered by that. I suppose you can still do sort of more normal poses where he's just yeah, this is definitely a bit of a problem, I suppose. You know, you can have just a normal pose of like him holding his staff there like so. Again, the lack of ankle joint here not particularly helping with making the figure stand up. And again, there's just that awkwardness with them. It's more work to kind of just mess around, sort of play with the figures than I think there needs to be. Definitely. So let's quickly open up this Aang here, this one, and we'll do the comparison. So do we have tape here? Yeah, we do. So I'll just put this. Okay, so open this, pull the tray out, and it's just got the typical background shot there. So here's what you get. In this sense, it's a cool as just a set that they're able to just show you everything in the pack like really clearly like this. It makes the box unnecessarily large, again, compared to say the normal packaging, which is like, you know, less than half of the width of this. I get you've got a big accessory here, but I think there's probably a way where you maybe could have made it just a little thicker and just had this be in like a second layer or something like that behind Aang, and just really cut down the packaging by half. Still make it sort of a windowed box, but just not make it so needlessly large. Because again, we've seen this staff before. The figure is basically the same outside of the different expression. So the only real difference is this. So let's get into this. Let's take all this stuff out. There's the glider, another staff, and the other figure. Okay, so here is this Aang out of the packaging. So straight away, it's kind of like, okay, this figure is basically identical, isn't it? To the point where like I'm kind of just looking at them here, and without looking closely at the faces, I'm kind of like, wow, these are basically the same figure. There's no sense that the sculpting is in any way different between them outside of the head, of course. Every minor little detail throughout the figure is exactly the same. So that's not particularly ideal. Now, the question really is like, what could they have done to make them all that different? I think there's a few ideas. The problem that I would have immediately, and I knew this from just looking at them, is that they've chosen across both figures the same core expression, and that is happy Aang, wide mouth, smile. And so they made the normal figure, the one we just reviewed, and they're like, what do we do to change the expression from this? Let's have him open his mouth a bit more. Like, what? Like, this is a point where I'm just like, why do you do this and make it so similar? In that, you want people realistically to buy both, don't you? So why do you effectively make them almost identical? In that, you know, personally, I think the normal head sculpt is better, because I think his mouth is too wide open in this one. Especially given that this is the gliding one, the fact that he's going to glide with his mouth wide open is just a bit weird. But the fact that there's no other difference. One thing I think you perhaps could have done, again, to make it substantially different, is of course just make this a completely different expression. Make this the maybe normal Aang, and then make the standard Aang the one with maybe a bit of a angry battle expression. Have him just have a closed mouth expression that's kind of neutral with maybe a slight smile. Or the really obvious thing that's a repaint for any Avatar figure, have one of them be an Avatar state Aang. So it's the same, you could actually probably use the same expression, but the eyes are the pure white Avatar state glow. Instead of blue, it's white paint, and then on the arms, it's white paint. And especially on Book 1 Aang, the paint applications are going to be rather small, because it's just the little bits you see on his hands, and then the main stuff is just the head, which already they've done. They've made a change with the head, so why couldn't they've just done a little bit more? In that, like, I don't need to go over this figure because I showed you its face. Otherwise, it's, you know, exactly the same. I was wondering if the hands would be different, but as you can see, they're the same grasping hands that are just in, like, basically that sort of holding pose, so they're open for anything. There's that. The two glider staff are the same. Yeah. They're just, I suppose, warped slightly differently based on the packaging and stuff like that. They're the exact same height. No details are different about these two. Which leaves obviously this as being the main difference. This is why it's a combo set. Why it costs more is because you get this large accessory of the open splayed out glider, like they gave you with the Book 1 Aang Diamond Select figure. So that's kind of cool. Now, what's interesting about this is that I believe the pricing on this is, what, $15? So it's $10 for a normal figure, $15 for that set. Now, what I find interesting about that is that the pricing for me in like Europe, Ireland, it was a lot closer between the two. Now, admittedly, if it means that we pay more for just a standard figure, it's $10, but it's more like, you know what, like $12.99 for one of these. But for me, the combo Aang was only $14.99. So there's a $5 difference if you buy it in America, but it's only like a €2 difference over here. So that I find it interesting that they could do that with the pricing and so on. I actually like this accessory. It's kind of cool. Whereas the Diamond Select one went for more of a rigid approach, where like it's really solid and you feel like if you dropped it, it would sort of shatter. This one obviously is quite flexible, especially here. There's a lot of material with the wings, so it's quite flexible here. And it doesn't feel like you'd easily break this at all. So that's cool. It's also got the cool texturing that all the figures tend to have on their clothing. I didn't really mention this with the figure here, but obviously like Aang's kind of like boots here kind of have that texturing. The sides here have a little bit of texture on them. And again, his shawl bit here has a bit of texture. Obviously the main one with Katara was the front of her kind of dress here has nice texture. Again, highlighting here that it's fabric, keeping these bits of the wings together, and again they have a nice texture there. And also just the details, like the molding here, that they've molded a little bit of a kind of bump in the fabric there, that it's not perfect. It's kind of cool. And it just it's that subtle little details that make it work really quite well. So now we get into, can you actually pose him with the glider? Because again, look at the way I have this one posed. Hands holding onto the bits just before the fabric. But this is the key bit here. You sort of have to point the legs back and have them behind here as the sort of resting point, because that's how it works. But these figures don't have ankle articulation. So can you really do this pose properly? Is going to be the question here. So we go for something like this. How does that work? Is that okay? Yeah, that I guess should be okay. So we go on here, whoops. Yeah, that just about fits. And then what? Just put his whole leg behind here. Yeah, that's okay. It's better than I kind of expected, I suppose. It obviously I think looks a bit better with the Diamond Select one than it does here, just because you're kind of straining a little bit here. I guess is this where maybe the height is a little bit off? Maybe the glider should be a bit longer or something like that. Just because it does feel like, you know, it's his feet are meant to just come up behind the lower wings, but his feet go way past it. And that's even with like him holding it in kind of an awkward position, whereas he should more be maybe like down a little bit. I don't know. It works kind of, but it's obviously not the most impressive to a degree. And that's the thing with the glider, is that this is the only pose you can do. Like, there's no other real, in a way, like use for a gliding pose other than to show it like this. But because it doesn't come with a stand, and there's nothing really built into this at all to add in a stand, it's like, how do you even showcase it? Like, okay, for like play, sure, Aang glides around like this, great, no problem. But if you want to just like pose it like this somewhere, what do? Do you have to just stand him up like this? Just leave him like that? It feels like a little bit of thought didn't quite come into this situation, in that it probably needed a stand of some sort. But you know, that's what it is. Again, it's the smaller scale line. I suppose it is more for, you know, the aim or for kids, and, you know, actually just messing around with them, and that's why everything's not quite perfect. It kind of works, but it's not like really ideal. But like I said, I think my big problem with the two Aangs is just how similar they are. That, ignoring the heads, the figure at its core is the same, and you get the same basic accessory, and that is the normal glider between the two. The only difference that there is between the figures is the slightly different head sculpt. But it is only slightly different. It's the same basic expression, only slightly different. Why didn't they go for something clearly more different? The other thing I might have said is also that, given that this is the one that comes with the glider, I understand why they would definitely use this style of figure, so he can have his arms go above his head and not have something awkward happen here with the shawl piece. Maybe they might have made the normal Aang have more of an accurate attempt at that orange shawl bit. Just to, again, create a little bit of a distinction between them. But really, I think probably what they should have done is, in like literally wave 1, the glider combo pack is book 1 Aang, and the normal Aang is book 3. That's probably the way they should have done it, to, I suppose, be nice to fans, I suppose. Yes, it's a whole other mold, and I guess this is them wanting to get good use out of the Aang mold, but you need to do, I think, something a little bit different here. And the fact that you really, this is the only kind of real uniqueness between the two of them, is a little frustrating for me. So it's weird, because to me, the perfect Aang is probably the figure from the single pack, because the head sculpt, I think, is better with this glider, but that requires you to buy both. But again, the difference is so subtle that I think if you want the glider, just get the combo pack, and you probably don't need the normal Aang, is probably my recommendation. So there's that. It's interesting, definitely. Here's just the Aang next to Katara, of course. So that's pretty cool. The size is the same. So that's obviously slightly inaccurate, in that, especially back in book 1, Aang should be a little shorter than Katara. And then, of course, like by the end of the series, he's more or less the same height as her, and then in the comics, he's taller than her. That always feels a little bit weird to me, that like you don't really try to keep the scale between the characters, but you know, I think the idea is that the characters look good together is probably the main thing. That, yes, they don't come out without any fancy accessories or anything like that, but, you know, just standing next to each other, the figures do look decent. So if you just pose them relatively nicely on your shelf, you're going to get, I suppose, everything you want out of them. Now, the final thing is to bring in Appa. For me, the star so far from wave 1 is the big Appa figure. Now, I obviously reviewed Katara individually and then Appa. So the figure that I was basically using with Appa was Katara. But because of the way her leg articulation works with her skirt pieces, she basically can't really sit on Appa. But, like I said, Aang is the character who has nothing in the way of his leg articulation. So he's the character who should be able to just sit properly in Appa. So let's put him in. And you can see, yeah, he does in fact sit there normally. As the only character who can properly sit down with his articulation, he can sit there. But as you can see, he takes up basically the whole saddle. And the idea is that realistically, you can't properly fit 2 characters in here. Appa, who can hold, like, theoretically, like, 12 people if he absolutely has to, but like at least 6 or 7, can't really hold 2. And look at the way Katara is there with the articulation. I tried to stretch her legs out so that they were pointing straight out, but the front piece has forced her legs down to like a 45-degree angle, and then the weight of the figure doesn't actually push the lower piece down, so she's sort of just sitting like that, which, you know, highlights that this material is too thick for what you want to accomplish. And so it's one of those ones where, like, look, there's a lot of criticisms to have about these as figures, but for the price point, they are good representations of the characters. So if you just want to do some basic posing with them, looks good. And like I said, probably like the way they showed this in the promo shots, the way you're probably going to set up your Wave 1 stuff is probably with Aang sitting on Appa and then the other characters just like standing in front. And that was basically the promo shot they put out. I think that's really the only way to sort of do that properly. But yeah, you know, here's Katara's effect piece. Again, why is it curved so much? I don't really understand. But, you know, Aang can hold it if he wants. He's a waterbender too. So you can do that if you so wish. So, yeah, there is my review for both of the Aangs from the McFarlane 5-inch line. Let me know what your thoughts are on what I had to say about them. Which one do you think is better? Why do you think they made them so similar? Yeah, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.